Hello, everyone. Welcome to another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. This is Tessa here. I'm so honored to introduce to you a very special guest. We have Rachel Macy Stafford on the show. She is a multiple New York Times bestselling author. And she has a new book coming out in March 2023. And by the time this airs, Rachel, your book will be out. So everyone will be able to run and pick it up wherever books are sold. And we are mainly going to focus on that book today, Soul Shift, The Wary Human's Guide to Getting Unstuck and Reclaiming Your Path to Joy. And I'll hold up the beautiful cover for those of you that are watching on YouTube. And just a little bit more about Rachel before we get going. So like I said, multiple New York Times bestselling author. Other books include Hands-Free Mama, Only Love Today, and Live, Love Now, all beautiful titles. Also a wildly successful blog, which I had a chance to dive into a little bit, Rachel, as I was getting prepared for this. So I'm so honored you're here. Thank you so much for your time. And how are you today?
I'm having a great day. The sun is shining where I am in Georgia, and that just makes me feel much happier.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that vitamin C, it does wonders.
It really does.
The soul and the psyche. Speaking of the soul. So I guess I'd like to just start a little bit with your origin story. I mean, you've been writing for a while now. Perhaps it came to you as an innate talent. Perhaps it's something you developed over time, but I just love to hear your origin story as it pertains to this work that you do.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And it's a little interesting. I don't like to just jump right in and say, oh yeah, I'm an author. I've been an author, because that wouldn't be, doing the whole story justice, which it bothers me when I hear people like, oh, they're so successful, but then we don't know, like, what's the background? Like, how did you get there? And so honestly, I wanted to be an author like when I was 8 years old. I love to write. Like, it was my favorite thing to do, just fill up notebooks. And I ended up going into teaching because you know how it goes when the world and the people around you say, well, I don't think you're going to make it, as a writer. It's really hard to, break into that industry. And so I went kind of like the safe path, which was teaching. And I'm super grateful for all the time that I had as a special education teacher for kids with behavior problems, because I think that really shaped the work that I do now. But anyway, it was just one of those things that, like, it was a dream that I kind of just let go. And then I kind of hit this turning point in my life. I have two daughters and they were young. And I was just feeling this overwhelming sense of heaviness and dread all the time. And it was like, just, I realized that I had lost like that joyful part of myself, like just being uninhibited and spontaneous. And there were a lot of different factors which were contributing, but I knew that as I was beginning to take out my anger and my resentment on my daughters, especially, and my partner, that it wasn't how I wanted to live.
Mm.
And so I started writing to myself in a journal about it and about the little changes that I wanted to make, because I knew as a special education teacher, if you want to make a transformation in your life, it's not going to come from like a big overhaul or a big sweeping change. It's going to come from small, doable steps, one after the other. And so that is where I developed this soul shift process. I didn't call it that at the time, but that's what this was, this path to back to my most authentic self, that joyful part of me that I feel like truly at peace.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I think so many of us can resonate with that calling back to our true selves. And everyone who listens to this podcast regularly knows I resonate with your story very, very much. And I had a similar kind of cultural experience where I always wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. I was writing books when I was 5. I was always making up stories. But I got this message very early on that being an artist in that way is, just like you said, a hard path and doomed to failure. The message that I received was that I would become like an addict, or I would become an alcoholic, or I wouldn't be able to, like you said, make a living. So it's just unfortunate that we speak in our society about the craft of writing in such a way, because I mean, throughout this process of having this podcast, I mean, mostly I'm talking to authors. And let me tell you, you all are a successful, capable, dependable bunch of people that have it together and have shown me time and time again that this is a viable way to go. Not only is it viable, but like it's so worthwhile. I mean, if I could spend all of my waking hours with a book in my hand, sitting in a chair, I would. Maybe I can.
Agree. Well, and I do feel like the authors, even in the past couple years with everything that's gone on with the pandemic, I feel like authors and artists like really saved us.
Yeah.
Because, when we couldn't go and communicate and connect with people, there was always a book, and just to be able to read other people's lived experiences and understand each other that way. So I totally agree with you. It's like we need to value those occupations more than we do in our society.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. There's so many directions I want to go, because your work in particular, it's very unique. Like the way that this particular book, Soul Shift, is written is very, very interactive. And I can see now that you're saying like you started to write to yourself in a journal. I can really see that in this work that you do here in Soul Shift. And I'm like, where do I want to start with this? I love the guideline, the how to use this guide book in the very beginning. And the thing that really jumped off the page to me in this section was the assurance for your pocket. Because literally, I'm not kidding you, Rachel. I was literally clenching my fist as I read. If you're still holding any doubts about the timing of your preparedness, please unclench your fists. I was like, oh my God, I am clenching my fists. I didn't even realize it. And I was hunching my shoulders up. And then I was like, oh, and release the weight of doubt. And then I relaxed and I was like, okay, all of these amazing affirmations that follow, just because you didn't experience a close, loving relationship doesn't mean you can't cultivate one. Just because you didn't hear people own their mistakes doesn't mean you can't accept your humanness. Just because you were loved unconditionally, this one for real, doesn't mean you have to keep proving your worth. Just because you were loved, I'm going to say that one again. Just because you were loved, sorry, I said it backwards. Okay, I'm starting over and I'm saying it again. Just because you were loved conditionally doesn't mean you have to keep proving your worth. I mean, and it goes on, right? There's all of these affirmations are so valid, but it was just such an invitation to dive into this work in a way that was very safe and honoring of these different degrees that we think about trauma in terms of. We all have our own reasons for behaving the way that we do, and for all of our own little tics and unique personalities that are both blessings and challenges that we can learn to love and maybe transcend beyond. But I so resonated with that. So that's where I wanted to start. And I guess I'd like to hear if there's anything you would like to add to how to use this book, The Soul Shift.
Yeah, well, thank you for reading that. It always touches me to hear people read my work out loud. And because sometimes you write it and you don't really think about it, but hearing you read it, I got like a lump in my throat, because I love that you felt that support, that this was your journey, that you could do this at your pace, that you were supported, that you were safe, because I do feel like we need to have more spaces in our life where we can explore, these hard questions, really. Like when we're talking about how do I get back to my true authentic self? Like, who am I? What sparks me? Those are difficult and intimidating questions. And so what I wanted people to feel when they entered the soul shift experience was, I wanted them to feel like they were in this actual botanical garden where there's like no set path. There's no timetable. There's no checklist. This is your experience to slow down, to listen, to explore and discover. And so I do that a lot in the book. Before I ask some of these introspective questions that I ask myself, I remind people there are not any right or wrong answers. And this is not a time to judge ourselves. Because, when we're talking about things like setting boundaries, and I have this boundary assessment tool, like, do you say yes when you want to say no? And I don't want people to think, oh, I'm ashamed. I should be ashamed because, yes, I do that all the time. That's not what this is about. This is about becoming aware. Because once you become aware that you're doing these actions or these choices that don't honor yourself, then you're like, oh, so when I have a choice of doing what someone's asking me to do, maybe it would help for me to say, what do I want to do? And so that's basically what this whole journey is, just raising our awareness to choice by choice. Like, how do you start loving yourself? That seems like such a hard question. You're like, oh, I don't even know where to start. Well, you start with one choice. And when you hear yourself saying, I'll never be able to set boundaries, that's a self-limiting thought that you can say, wait a second, maybe someone told me that one time, or maybe this is a belief that I, internalize, but I'm an adult now and I get to decide what messages I'm giving myself, and I am worthy of saying no. And that's how you start. It's one choice at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something to me really key, and something that I revisit over and over again, probably every day, because it's a quote that stuck to my fridge. And to quote you, what do I want to do? And I know
Mhm.
you're speaking of it in a broader context than this, but I always come back to this quote that's on my fridge, and I'm trying to recall it from memory. And so I might butcher it a little bit, but it's something along the lines of, few people know so clearly what they want in life. Most people can hardly think to what to wish for when they throw a penny in a fountain.
Hmm.
And I can't remember who the author is. I'll have to go look at my fridge and then put that in the show notes and
Wow.
write it out clearly as it was written originally. But when you say, what do you want, period, or what do you want to do,
Mhm.
question mark, um, I mean, this is the work to me of getting to that place. And also, I think something that often is a follow-up statement or question for me is, it's scary to think about the commitment to that thing, because what if we change our minds? What if we
Mhm.
answer the question of what we want, and then we go, let's take, for example, being an author.
Mhm.
And then it's kind of like the follow-up to that is, well, what if I fail? Or what if I change my mind and that scene is failure? So
Mhm.
it's almost like this fear of commitment and fear of failure at the same time. And maybe even there's, if we were to take it another layer deeper, maybe there's even a fear of success and being seen in that
Right.
area.
Well, and I love that you bring that up, that when you decide, okay, so my heart's telling me I want to try to, for example, be an author. I'm just feeling this in my body. Like, every soul, every fiber in my soul wants to try this. And then, like you said, what if you decide, wow, this is harder than I thought, or this isn't what I thought it was going to be? And that actually happened to me. I write about it in the book, where about 5 years into it, and I was experiencing all this success, and it was almost like too much. Like, wait a minute, I didn't want to be this vulnerable. I didn't want all these people to be reading these words. And I didn't want this, I didn't want so many people reaching out to me, asking me if I have their answers. And I was telling my dear friend Shannon about this. I said, I don't, I'm not happy writing anymore. Like, this is sucking the joy out of it. And she said, Rachel, you're a map maker. You are not a travel agent. You are not a baggage carrier. You're taking on things that you are not supposed to be taking on. And then her saying you're a map maker, it was like the whole sky just opened up for me. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's so right. Like, I'm not telling anyone else how to do their journey. I'm just showing them my map, how I got back to my joy, and I'm inviting them to come along. And I'll say, here's a route that I took, here's a tool that I used, but I don't have anyone's answers. And to put that pressure on myself was making me miserable. So I love this idea of, yes, we can commit to something that we feel called to do, but we can, at any point, we can reassess and say, what's the job description? Is this the job description that I wrote, or are these expectations people are putting on me?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a wise friend, and what a beautiful
It
gift of
is.
freedom.
Yeah.
That brings to mind this blog post of yours that I was just reading to prepare for this interview, and that's and this is in the context of something totally different, but it's the message that, like, somebody's words can totally alter the course of your life. And in that case, it seems like it was true for you with the words of your friend. But I'm thinking about the blog post about the 5-second rule that your daughter taught you. And when I read the title of that, I was like, oh, I think I know what the 5-second rule is. It's like, we pause before we respond, right? No. So I was
I
wondering
know.
if in your words, you would share that story with us.
Yeah, I would love to. So my daughter was 15 at the time, and she got off the bus and told me that her bus driver pulled her aside and asked her about her hair color change, because Avery had decided to go from blonde to like dark chestnut. And her bus driver pulled her aside and she said, honey, why would you do that to your beautiful hair? And so, of course, the mom in me was like, she said what? Like, I was just kind of fired up. And Avery said, well, she must not know the 5-second rule. Like, she was just so matter of fact. I was like, well, what is it? What is this 5-second rule? And she said, if you want to give someone feedback or make a comment about someone's appearance, if they can't fix it in 5 seconds, don't say anything. So then she was like giving me example of, they've got food in their teeth. That takes less than 5 seconds to fix. If they have, something in their nose or toilet paper on their shoe, but hair color, body size, skin, how your skin looks, those are off limits. And I just think that's so brilliant.
Yeah.
And of course, she saw it on TikTok. So that's where the teenagers get all their good information these days.
Apparently, yeah, I still can't really quite. I haven't embraced TikTok yet, but I do appreciate it through the lens of my nephew, who's 21 and teaches me all about the new technology.
Yes,
Keeps me
sure.
youngish. Well, so this topic of wisdom from our children, I think, is so. It's really cool, and I think you have a lot to share on that subject, having been an elementary school teacher and having two daughters yourself. And I'm curious if over the years there have been, and this is certainly a big one. Obviously, you wrote a blog post about it, but if there's any like really top one or two lessons you've learned from your children that you'd want to share.
Yeah, they're definitely Avery is my younger daughter and she's 16 now. And when she was younger, um, she was kind of a thorn in my side because I am a very efficient, productivity driven person. And that, of course, is stuff I'm working through because I base a lot of my worth on how much I accomplish. And Avery is cut from a completely different cloth. And she just really goes through life as a thoughtful observer. She's constantly taking in all the details around her, not just in nature, but in people. Like she's very intuitive about how people are feeling. And, she is good about like talking to people and hearing their stories. And it really didn't seem like a gift for the first maybe 5 years of her life to me. It felt like it was a hindrance on where I was going in my agenda. And there was a moment when my older daughter said something to Avery about hurrying up and getting out of the car. And the way she spoke to her, it was like a mirror. I could see myself in my older daughter because my older daughter was learning this is how we treat Avery. This is how we treat people who are slower and more mindful. And it hit me that I was squelching this beautiful spirit of being this intentional traveler. Because think about it, we don't know that many people who really go through life like that. And so I began by just like abandoning the words hurry up. I told myself, I am not going to use those words anymore with Avery. And so I remember working on this with her and allowing her to take her time in certain situations and noticing the way, she picks out her pajamas and she smells them, to, takes in the scent, or she eats her apple and she digs out the seed. And I'm trying to just like, wow, like look at this beautiful way of living. And after a couple months of it, we went to a snow cone shack and she sat down at the picnic table and she got this little like worried look on her face. And she said, Mama, can I take my time? And I said, yes, baby, you can take as much time as you need. And she ate the whole thing just so slowly, savoring every bite. Then she got to the last bite and she held it out to me and she said, I saved the last bite for you, Mom. And I remember thinking, like, this is what life is all about. Like, these are the moments, like, life is sweeter and more meaningful when we slow down, take our time, and pay attention. And I gave her this name that I call her my noticer because she notices all the important details of the world and she responds with love and compassion. And if anything that my daughters have taught me, that would probably be at the top of the list, that slow is not bad. Slow is good. And I think she probably added years to my life because of the way that she's changed me and shifted me into more of who she is rather than going in the way that the world operates.
Wow. I love that story. I'm just thinking about certain people in my life who kind of emulate that similar ability to slow down. And I have a similar reaction to you in terms of feeling like my value comes from my efficiency, my single pointed focus, my ability to get many things done, my productivity. What do I produce at the end of the day? But so much, you're right. I think so much comes from, well, I just think about the difference between driving somewhere and walking somewhere and how much more I notice
Oh
because
my
I'm going that
gosh.
much slower, how much
Yeah.
more I notice about the world around me. Such a beautiful lesson. Thank you so much for sharing that. I guess I'm wondering for you, because I want to put that into practice myself. And so I'm trying to think about how do I start to embody this idea of embracing slowing down and also being on time for things and also honoring that part of myself that is efficient and values productivity. How do you reconcile? Because they seem like opposites,
Yeah.
right? How do we
Right.
embrace them both?
Yeah. Well, I think how I managed this with Avery was I kind of just, again, started becoming aware of how often I rush through things that don't actually need to be rushed through. And so when you become mindful that I don't always have to go at that speed, and then you start to decide, okay, because I was wanting to give her an opportunity to go at her pace. And so I would see things like, we would go to the grocery store and I would say to myself, Rachel, think about this. You don't have anything going on after this. If she wants to stop and talk to the man at the deli, or the cashier, then that's okay. And so it was like, I kind of like set this intention with myself. And what happens is when you are part of these special connections with people or even your own heart, like what you were saying, when you notice things along your walk, those feelings of peace and joy that you get in those connective moments, they are so reinforcing that you want to keep experiencing them. So what you do is you just start to become more aware of, I have an opportunity right now. I'm doing the dishes. Let's say you're doing the dishes. And you can say, you know, this could be an opportunity for me to think about all the things I'm grateful for instead of let's see how fast I can do this. And there's a lot of science behind like that feeling of accomplishment when you do a task that we don't get from some of these big major goals that we have in life. Washing our dishes is a wonderful feeling of I can do this and I can accomplish this and I can feel this sense of purpose and I can be mindful why I'm doing it. And so one of the things that I would tell myself, because I almost imagine that I just lived with this big, heavy clock on my chest that was always ticking. And I realized I can take that heavy ticking clock off. I don't have to wear this every day of my life. And even if I'm sitting with my husband, and I would start picking up things around him like while he's talking. I'm like, why don't you just be here now? Look into your husband's eyes. Don't feel the need to multitask your life away. And so again, that peaceful feeling that you don't get when you're running 100 miles per hour becomes something that you want to become a way of life.
Yeah. That has me thinking, well, you have this is very much, you talk about it in the book, the practice of presence habit shift. That's
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying. But you call out 3 specific steps or parts to that in the book. Would you mind sharing what those are?
Not at all. So the first step is to notice a chance to connect. And then it's the next one. Can you read them?
I'm
I,
trying to find, oh, here it is.
I feel like it's
Right.
notice, pause, and respond.
Yeah, hold on.
Notice,
I just had it too. That's why I was like, oh.
notice.
It's so funny how we write things like this. Oh, yeah. Okay. Notice a chance to connect is the
Mhm.
first one.
Yes.
Let go of distraction. second one, which is what you're just saying, like, and then be all there. I mean, you basically said that in the way that you were like, okay, I'm noticing I'm multitasking. Okay, I'm going to make a conscious decision to let go of the other things I'm trying to pick up, and then be all there. I mean, this is to me what you're saying when you're talking about looking your husband in his eyes and just giving him your full attention.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's on page 23 in the first practice, presence. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. Well, so, and I want to go back. I want to not back. I want to go forward to practice 4. This is a practice of being kind to yourself, which, I mean, these are all themes that we're just talking about today. And the kind of the call to action or the stories around identifying our emotional armor, number 1, which is so, I mean, that could be like our life's work right there, right? Just identifying our emotional armor. And identifying our comparison traps, right? Again, very much could be the life work, and identifying our windows of recovery. So I was wondering if you would help us unpack those in terms of, and you give so many great examples, but, and notes to ponder. I love the notes to ponder throughout. But how do we like embody these things? Because they seem like such noble things that we all work towards, and we all, when we stop and pause and remember, when we do those 3 steps of presence, it's just so easy to forget, right? How do we embody these things?
Yeah. So when I began practicing this idea of learning to be kind to myself, it came because I had learned through the practice of presence, like how powerful it was to push away all these external distractions, like we're talking about the phone and the to-do list and things that the world is always telling us are so urgent. But what happened when I was practicing presence, just 10 minutes every morning, just really getting quiet and listening to myself, I realized there was a lot of distraction going on inside me, which was how I talked to myself. And it wasn't kind, and I think a lot of us grew up hearing, be kind to others, be kind to others, be kind to others. We never heard, are you being kind to yourself right now? And so realizing I kind of had this like inner bully that was always pushing me to really major extremes, or like the comparison of other people, or emotional armor saying, if you try that you're going to fail, and it's like protecting me. And so becoming aware, wow, I really give myself a lot of self-defeating messages. And is that actually helping me to reach these goals that I want to reach, which was, I just wanted to show up as myself and make my contribution. Like, I feel like everybody has a unique contribution to make, and so many times we limit ourselves by the way that we're talking to ourselves. And so beginning to understand, like, wow, I just told myself, like standing in front of the mirror, that I can't go out looking like that. I just said that to myself. You can't go out looking like that. You're going to be rejected. And to really just unpack that and say, wait a second, is that what I value when I get together with my friends? Am I looking at their appearance and saying, wait a minute, no. So why am I using that as a standard to measure myself? And so all of this idea of just becoming aware of the way you're talking to yourself, and then saying, would I say this to a friend or to my child or to my partner, you can't go out looking like that. No, I would never say that. And so I began to say, well, what would you say? What would your nurturing voice say to a friend or your child? And I might say something like, you're not feeling really great about your body right now, but you know, that's okay. We all have these bad days. So what do we need to do to make you feel good about showing up, because you're going to be missed if you don't go. Your friends are counting on you. And my little compassionate voice inside me, which is I think a lot of my 8-year-old self who loved to fill those notebooks and loved to run around in the sprinkler in her bathing suit, not worrying about her square shaped body, just that little girl who sees things. That little protective voice is like, grab a hat. Just grab a hat, Rachel, and don't even look in the mirror anymore. And so hats for me became a really important way of nurturing myself and connecting to that spontaneous, uninhibited side of me. And so instead of standing at the mirror, letting the inner critic have its way with me, I just bypassed the mirror and I just threw on the hat and showed up. And every time I showed up, even when I didn't feel worthy of showing up, because that's important. We're not going to feel worthy of showing up just because we tell ourselves we're worthy. But anytime I said compassionately, what do you need to do to be able to go and contribute? Put on the hat. I would go, and every single time I would realize I met someone there. I needed to be there. There was a connection that I needed to make as myself in the body that I am in. And if I hadn't, it would have been a tragedy. And so then you have this experience of, I didn't feel worthy of showing up, but I showed up anyway. And I experienced true belonging and connection in the body that I'm in. And that's how you begin to break down these self-limiting beliefs that have been holding us back for so long.
Wow. I'm just taking a moment to pause and let that sink in, because it's such a nice reminder, an invitation for us to practice the same in whatever way that shows up for us in our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think what I'd like to do next, and because I want to be mindful of your time, spend a little bit more time. Well, actually, I do have a question. I was wondering, because you said that you started writing in your journal to yourself to return to your soul. Mm-hmm. Did you always know that was going to become this book, or was it somewhere along the way? How did this come about into a book?
Yeah, not at all. Writing to myself was something that I knew worked for me when I was younger. That was where I felt the most peaceful, even if I didn't show anybody what I was writing. So it was nice to not have a space where you're not getting validated by external factors. I think that's really important for people to have a space where they can create, and it's not for public consumption. And, so I was writing to myself, and I was just writing down these experiences of what's happening when I let go of distraction and grasp what really matters. And I love to tell stories. So a lot of my journals were just little stories, of something that my daughter said to me when I did this practice of presence, or something my husband said to me. And I realized, this is pretty powerful. And in fact, I told my husband one day, he was getting ready to take the girls to a science museum on a Saturday morning. And I said something, I kind of got the courage to tell him what I'd been writing about. I said, I have this concept I've been working on. It's called going hands free. I try to let go of all my distractions for a very short amount of time. And I just try to be all there, just completely available to whatever's going on around me.
Mm.
And he said, huh. He's like, well, I've noticed something different about you, but I couldn't put my finger on it, that was kind of nice and reinforcing. Well, he comes back from the science museum and he's like, I tried that hands-free thing that you were telling me about. And he's like, I didn't get my phone out. I didn't look at the time. I didn't watch what other parents were doing and compare myself to them. I just enjoyed being with the girls. And he said, I can't remember a time that I felt just so at peace. And I was like, gosh, here I am. I'm a special ed teacher. So I love to teach and encourage. I love to write. And I love to be honest and vulnerable, and not put on a facade. So maybe with these three things that feel like my gifts, maybe I'm supposed to share this outside of myself.
Mhm.
And so that is when I started writing on a blog, thanks to my sister, Rebecca, who she was more tech savvy than I was 10 years ago. And she was like, Rachel, this blog stuff is all the rage. And I was like, what in the world? And so she's like, oh, you can have conversations with people and, put your stories out there. And so that's how it all started, was just putting it out there and having people reach back and say, wow, this kind of feels like you're in my brain. Like, do you have a camera in my house? Like we're experiencing these same emotions about not wanting to miss our lives. And that's where it started, and that's where it's gone.
I love that. That's handsfreemama.com.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful blog. And then the books followed that because
Yes. Mm-hmm.
so is Hands Free Mama also a book in addition to a
Yes.
blog? Okay.
Yes.
That's what I was
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
thinking.
So that's kind of what Hands Free Mama got me on the radar, I guess you
Uh-huh.
could say. And that's when the publishers kind of started getting interested. And but at the time, when I'm practicing these little strategies and things that I've learned as a special education teacher, I didn't really understand like how I needed to like work on my internal parts of myself rather than just I worked on cultivating an external world that was more conducive to thriving. But I also realized we can't always control what's going on around us. So how can we cultivate peace within ourselves?
Mhm.
And that's what, over the last 3 or 4 years, especially with the pandemic, and my younger daughter went through a very traumatic experience. And I realized, like, it felt like the world was falling down around me, but I had learned how to sit with those really hard, painful feelings and uncomfortable feelings through the practice of presence and what I'd been doing. And it dawned on me, like, the best person to walk with my daughter through this painful journey that she has to walk through, it is me. I've been preparing for this. And so I do feel like all of this, where I started and where it took me and the time that it took me, like, this was not an overnight thing at all. This is years and a process, but it led me to where I needed to be this past year in my daughter's life. And for that, it's, I mean, the gratitude for that is just overflowing.
Mhm. I'm sure your daughter is. I always wondered about as kids go through those experiences, those really tough, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. So I'm just kind of speaking
Yes.
broadly, but I always wonder, as children are going through that with parents as present as you are,
Mhm.
what a different experience that might be for kids who don't have that presence, and maybe they feel like they go through it alone. And I was just, I've been watching this show. I've been shamelessly binge watching the show, Ginny and Georgia.
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
if you've seen it.
My daughter loves that show, actually.
Well, it struck me this one scene where, sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, Ginny's like begging her mother to tell her about her past because she doesn't know much about it. And Georgia's like, have you ever thought that I'm protecting you from these things, these truths that aren't going to be helpful for you? And then finally, Georgia, who's the mother, says, I was abused as a kid. And, she's like, I had a really hard upbringing and I got out of it. And her child's response was, wow, are you okay now? And the question that struck me most about this conversation was child to mother saying, well, do you think that made you stronger? Do you think that's why you're so strong?
Mm-hmm.
And Georgia, the mother's response was, I think I would have had way more energy and been way stronger and done something way bigger had I not had to go through that and use all of my energy just to survive.
Wow.
So I think what you're speaking to is like, because I often wonder about this idea of nature versus nurture and how we produce children that are producing children. That sounds like a terrible way to put it, but for lack of a better way to say, how do we help our children become who they are meant to be? How do we foster that sense of confidence, assurance, and go out in the world and be kind, the kind,
Yeah.
amazing people that they're supposed to be? And when they're faced with these moments of adversity, how do we show up as parents or mentors? And so I just think that's so important to be present and to allow your children to have these adverse experiences, but not to have to overly we don't have to make them overly suffer through it, right? We can walk through it with them.
Absolutely. And just to remind them that the mistakes that they made, because a lot of teenagers, when they make a mistake in this the culture that we live in, it comes with pretty big costs. And
Yeah.
so to be able to say, you are not your mistake, and this does not define you, and to keep reminding them this is hard and this is painful, but you are going to get through this. And that's what I felt like, that was my main thing, to be there for her and not reject her because she was rejecting herself. When you have shame and you wish you could do something over and you can't, there's a lot of shame with that. And to be able to love our children even when they've made these bad mistakes or they've done things that we think, how can this be my child? But the last thing they need is for us to turn away. They need us to turn toward them and say, you know what? I had moments in my life too where I didn't want to go back to school. I was too ashamed, but I did it. And you can do this. And I'm here with you through all of that. And so it is a beautiful thing when we can be human with our kids, because then they can be human with us.
Yeah. And we teach them so much about how to do that as they grow up. I mean, I often think about my relationship with my dad in terms of how to move through something really tough where I had made a mistake and I needed to apologize for some behavior. And he taught me how to do that because he was often on this emotional roller coaster, and he would come home from work and he would be angry, and it felt like, okay, everybody get out of his way. We got to walk on eggshells because we don't want that anger pointed at us. So he would go through this routine of being angry and slamming doors, and my mom and dad would fight. But eventually he would calm down, and I'm not excusing his behavior, right? But he and I have talked about this a lot, and he's worked on it a lot. And also what he would do is he would come apologize to me as an adult, as an authority figure, as a parental figure. He would come to me and he'd say, Tess, I'm sorry for how I acted. It wasn't right. It wasn't okay. And, this is what I will do differently in the future. This is what I will try to do differently in the future. And so that told me that okay, we're human. We can make mistakes, and we can also be forgiven, and we can move on, and we can learn from them, and we can work it out together. It doesn't have to be this huge secret and shameful thing
Exactly.
that we hold by ourselves.
That's
Um,
very powerful modeling. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
We have so much. I mean, you hear that cliche all the time that kids are like sponges, but really, I mean, your parental figures are who you learn how to be an adult from. Not
Right.
just your parental figures, but all the mentors in your life, your teachers,
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
people around you.
And
Um,
how they handle conflict and big feelings.
exactly.
They're watching.
Exactly.
And I mean, it's just as effective. Like my daughters know some of my unhealthy coping mechanisms for when I get anxious and stressed. They know those as well as the healthy ones, because I want to be completely like honest about, this is what I do sometimes when I'm anxious and I know that it's not healthy. And so then they can begin to see when they're doing behaviors that are more self-sabotaging than healing.
Yeah, I think that's so noble, so wise, and just so important to teach our kids how to do that too. To teach our kids how to, make mistakes.
Right.
Um, there was a couple of kind of, I guess, more like logistical things I wanted to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe logistic isn't the right word, but it's the one I'm going to use. In
Okay.
terms of like one content producer to another, because you do have this amazing blog, you're churning out books. I mean, I'm curious for those that are interested in building something similar, maybe it's a blog, maybe it's a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think about, because I know you're highly efficient and you like to produce, do you schedule out content? Do you produce blog regularly? How is it that you organize and structure this success that you've built for yourself?
So, this is not going to be like what any kind of like content creator expert would ever recommend. It's like I I do not schedule anything out. Like I am very wake up in the morning. I think about what I feel like I need to say, or something that feels like what other people need in their life to hear. And it is not very practical at all. Like I know that my marketing team right now with the book, they were like, you can go ahead and show us what you're going to do for the next month. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow. So, but I think it reflects the authenticity that I want people to feel when they come and read my work. I don't plan things that way. Now, when I'm writing a book, that's a different story, and I am very structured. I make a writing calendar, so I know what chapters, what parts of the book I need to have done by certain times, because the deadline comes. But with social media, I'm just so much more just like letting things flow, which is weird because I described how I am a planner, but then again, that's just what feels right to me. And if I don't feel like I have anything of value to say, I don't post. I am not one who's going to post because I'm on a schedule. Like, oh, you're supposed to post this many times a day. I'm not going to do that. But it is recommended. Like if anyone's trying to grow their platform, that consistency, is important.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what I keep hearing over and over
Yeah.
again. So it's actually nice that you kind of blend the two, that you allow yourself
Mhm.
the space to be creative and let that muse flow through you when it
Yeah.
does, and also to give yourself the structure when writing a book. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. It's been
Mhm.
such a blessing and honor to have you. Is there any last thing you want to add? I know I mentioned handsfreemama.com as the blog. Is there any other
Mhm.
place that you'd like to connect with people?
Yeah, if they do want to come see my spontaneous social media posts, that's on the Hands Free Revolution, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And there's a really beautiful community in both of those spaces where people understand like we're human and we just kind of show up and support each other. So I think it's a really nice space on the internet that can be sometimes judgmental. But yeah, so Soul Shift is kind of my heart right now, and I would love, for people to buy the book and possibly take the course. I offer that every fall online. So that's kind of a nice interactive way to experience it as well.
Perfect. I'll make sure all of those links get into our show notes so that people can find you and connect with you.
Thank you,
Rachel,
so much.
Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.